There's a precise moment when everything shifts. The narcissist suddenly feels the ground beneath them crumble, and they know, without question, that they've lost their primary source forever. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you understand these dynamics. I've spent years studying Jung's work on psychological projection and the shadow self, and what I'm about to share represents one of the most profound insights into human relationships. This isn't just about narcissism or empathy, it's about the very architecture of how we connect, control, and ultimately lose each other. Jung observed something fascinating about individuals who consistently manipulate others through emotional dependency. He noticed that these people operate from what he called the inflated ego, a psychological state where the person believes they are the center of others' emotional worlds. But here's what gets really interesting. There comes a moment when this entire construct collapses. Let me walk you through what actually happens in the narcissist's mind during this realization, because understanding this process will give you incredible insight into your own relationships and healing journey. The narcissist has built their entire identity around being indispensable to the empath. They've carefully constructed a reality where the empath needs them, depends on them, can't function without them. Jung called this the participation mystique, a primitive psychological fusion where boundaries between self and other become dangerously blurred. But then something shifts. The empath begins to individuate, Jung's term for the process of becoming psychologically whole and independent. This individualization threatens the narcissist's core identity structure because it breaks the symbiotic bond they've worked so hard to create. I want you to understand what's happening here on a deeper level. The narcissist isn't just losing a relationship. They're experiencing what Jung termed enantiodromia, the psychological principle where everything transforms into its opposite. Their sense of power becomes powerlessness. Their control becomes chaos. Their certainty becomes confusion. The moment of realization typically happens in 3 distinct phases, and I'm going to break these down for you, because recognizing these patterns will help you understand your own journey towards psychological freedom. Phase 1. The resistance. Initially, the narcissist cannot accept what's happening. They intensify their manipulation tactics, increase their emotional demands, and desperately try to pull the empath back into the old dynamic. Jung observed that when the inflated ego feels threatened, it doubles down on its grandiose defenses. During this phase, the narcissist might become more charming, more needy, more aggressive, sometimes cycling through all these states rapidly. They're operating from what Jung called the shadow, all the rejected aspects of their personality that they've refused to integrate. The shadow contains their deepest fears, abandonment, insignificance, and the terrifying possibility that they might be fundamentally unlovable. The empath, meanwhile, is beginning to access what Jung termed their true self, the authentic personality that exists beneath all the conditioning and people-pleasing. This authentic self has boundaries, has needs, and most importantly, has the capacity to say no. Here's something crucial to understand. The narcissist's resistance isn't actually about love or attachment in any healthy sense. It's about psychological survival. Their entire identity structure depends on having someone to project their unresolved conflicts onto. Without the empath serving as their psychological container, they're forced to confront the internal chaos they've been avoiding their entire lives. Jung wrote extensively about projection as a defense mechanism. The narcissist projects their own capacity for love, their own emotional regulation, their own sense of worth onto the empath. When the empath begins to withdraw these projections, the narcissist experiences what can only be described as psychological panic. I've observed this pattern countless times, and it always follows the same trajectory. The narcissist becomes increasingly desperate in their attempts to re-establish control. They might promise change, threaten abandonment, or cycle between extreme behaviors designed to provoke an emotional response. But here's what makes this phase so psychologically significant. The empath is simultaneously undergoing their own transformation. While the narcissist is fighting to maintain the old dynamic, the empath is discovering their authentic voice, their genuine needs, and their inherent worth that exists independent of others' validation. Phase 2. The recognition. This is where it gets psychologically fascinating. There's a specific moment when the narcissist realizes their tactics aren't working anymore. The empath isn't responding with the old patterns of guilt, fear, or desperate reconciliation. Instead, there's something new: emotional detachment. Jung wrote extensively about the power of emotional detachment in breaking unhealthy psychological bonds. When the empath stops being emotionally reactive, the narcissist loses their primary tool of control. It's like suddenly discovering that your most trusted weapon has no ammunition. I've seen this moment happen countless times, and it's always profound. The narcissist experiences what can only be described as psychological vertigo. Their internal compass, which has always pointed toward the empath's emotional availability, suddenly has no magnetic north. During this phase, the narcissist might experience what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a psychological crisis where their fundamental beliefs about themselves and relationships are challenged. They're forced to confront the reality that their identity has been built on controlling others, rather than developing authentic self-worth. The recognition phase is particularly devastating for the narcissist because it challenges their core belief about their own irresistibility and importance. They've always believed that their charm, their neediness, or their dramatic emotional displays could eventually break down any resistance. The empath's sustained detachment forces them to confront the possibility that they might not be as central to others' lives as they've believed. Jung described this as the collapse of the persona, the mask we show to the world. For narcissists, the persona isn't just how they present to others, it's often the only version of themselves they can tolerate. When this mask fails to achieve its intended effect, they're left staring at aspects of themselves they've spent years avoiding. What's particularly challenging for the narcissist during this phase is the empath's newfound emotional stability. The empath is no longer riding the emotional roller coaster of the relationship. They're not desperately seeking reconciliation or trying to fix whatever crisis the narcissist has manufactured. Instead, they're calmly moving forward with their own life. This stability is profoundly threatening to the narcissist because it demonstrates something they've never been able to achieve: genuine emotional regulation that doesn't depend on controlling others. The empath's peace becomes a mirror that reflects the narcissist's internal chaos. Let me share what this looks like in practical terms. The narcissist might send long emotional messages and receive brief, polite responses. They might create dramatic situations that previously would have sent the empath running to help, only to discover that the empath has boundaries and isn't available for emergency emotional labor. They might try to engage the empath in familiar conflict patterns, only to find that the empath simply doesn't engage. It's not that the empath has become cold or uncaring. They've simply learned to distinguish between genuine emergencies and manufactured drama. This recognition phase can last weeks or months, depending on how long it takes the narcissist to truly accept that their old strategies are no longer effective. Some never fully accept it and continue cycling through increasingly desperate attempts at control. Phase 3. The terrible realization. Here's where we reach the core moment, the instant when the narcissist truly understands they've lost the empath forever. This isn't about a temporary separation or a relationship pause. This is the devastating recognition that the empath has psychologically moved beyond their reach. Jung described this as the moment when the persona completely breaks down. The persona is the mask we show the world, but for narcissists, it's also the false self they show to themselves. When this mask shatters, they're forced to confront what Jung called the unlived life, all the authentic growth and genuine connection they've avoided through manipulation and control. The narcissist realizes that the empath has achieved something they never could: genuine psychological independence. The empath is no longer defined by the relationship, no longer desperate for validation, no longer willing to sacrifice their own well-being for someone else's emotional regulation. This realization hits them like a psychological earthquake because it forces them to confront a terrifying truth. They never actually loved the empath as a person. They loved what the empath did for their ego, how the empath made them feel powerful and needed and central. But real love, as Jung understood it, requires seeing the other person as a separate, autonomous being, something narcissists struggle to do. The terrible realization often comes in a moment of stark clarity. Perhaps the narcissist sees the empath living happily without them. Maybe they witness the empath in a healthy relationship where they're treated with genuine respect and care. Or it might simply be the accumulated weight of months of failed attempts at reconnection. Whatever triggers it, this moment is characterized by a profound sense of loss, that goes far beyond missing a relationship. The narcissist is confronting the loss of their primary coping mechanism, their main source of emotional regulation, and their most reliable method of avoiding self-confrontation. Jung wrote about what he called the confrontation with the unconscious, a psychological crisis that occurs when our defense mechanisms fail and we're forced to face the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. For narcissists, losing the empath often precipitates exactly this kind of crisis. I need to explain something important here about the depth of this loss. The narcissist isn't just losing a person, they're losing their entire psychological framework for understanding themselves and relationships. The empath has served as their external emotional processor, their validation source, and their repository for all the psychological growth they've been unwilling to do themselves. When the empath individuates and withdraws these functions, the narcissist is left facing what Jung termed the void, the empty space where authentic self-development should have occurred. This void is terrifying because it represents all the unlived emotional life, all the avoided growth, all the authentic connections they've sacrificed in favor of control and manipulation. The realization phase often includes what I call the inventory moment, when the narcissist suddenly sees the relationship clearly for what it was. They recognize that every supposed act of love was actually an attempt at control. Every moment of vulnerability was actually manipulation. Every expression of need was actually a demand for the empath to carry their emotional burdens. This inventory can be devastating because it forces them to confront not just what they've lost, but what they never actually had. They never had genuine intimacy. They had enmeshment. They never had love. They had possession. They never had connection. They had control. But here's what I really want you to understand. This moment of terrible realization, while devastating for the narcissist, represents the empath's complete psychological victory. The empath has successfully reclaimed their authentic self and established psychological sovereignty that the narcissist can no longer breach. Now, let me share something that might surprise you. Jung believed that this moment of devastating loss could actually become a catalyst for genuine psychological transformation. When the narcissist can no longer avoid their shadow, when they can no longer project their unlived life onto others, they have a choice. Begin the difficult work of authentic self-development, or sink deeper into psychological stagnation. Most choose stagnation. They move on to find another empath, another source of narcissistic supply, another person they can manipulate into carrying their emotional burdens. But some, a rare few, use this crisis as an opportunity to begin real psychological work. For those who are ready to face their shadow, this loss becomes what Jung called the call to adventure, the beginning of a heroic journey toward psychological wholeness. They must learn to develop genuine self-worth, authentic relationships, and the capacity to love without controlling. But here's what I really want you to understand. This transformation is not your responsibility. If you're the empath in this dynamic, your job is not to save the narcissist or provide them with opportunities for growth. Your job is to save yourself. Jung was clear about this. He wrote that we cannot individuate for another person. Each person must take responsibility for their own psychological development. The empath's journey toward wholeness might inspire the narcissist's transformation, but it cannot cause it or guarantee it. This is a crucial point that many empaths struggle with. They feel guilty about the narcissist's pain, responsible for their psychological crisis, or obligated to help them through their dark night of the soul. But this guilt is actually a remnant of the codependent dynamic that kept them trapped in the relationship. True compassion sometimes means allowing others to face the natural consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful. The narcissist's psychological crisis is the direct result of their refusal to develop authentic relationships and genuine self-worth. It's not the empath's fault, and it's not the empath's responsibility to fix. Let me tell you what this moment looks like from the empath's perspective, because this is equally important for your healing process. When the empath finally breaks free, they often experience what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that bridges the conscious and unconscious mind, creating new possibilities for growth and self-understanding. For many empaths, this moment comes after years of giving themselves away, losing their identity in other people's needs, and believing that their worth depends on how much they can sacrifice for others. The break from the narcissist isn't just about leaving one relationship. It's about reclaiming their entire sense of self. I've observed that empaths who successfully individuate from narcissistic relationships go through their own transformation process. They learn to distinguish between healthy empathy and pathological people-pleasing. They develop what Jung called differentiated empathy, the ability to feel for others without losing themselves in others' emotions. This is profound psychological work, and it changes everything about how they approach relationships going forward. They become what Jung termed wounded healers, people who have transformed their own suffering into wisdom and strength. The irony is beautiful. The narcissist loses the empath precisely because the empath becomes too psychologically healthy to be manipulated. The empath's growth becomes the narcissist's loss, and there's nothing the narcissist can do to reverse this process once it's begun. But I want to address something important here. Understanding this dynamic isn't about revenge or feeling superior to the narcissist. Jung emphasized that true psychological maturity involves holding compassion for others' suffering while maintaining firm boundaries around our own well-being. The narcissist's realization that they've lost you forever is ultimately about their own psychological poverty, not your inherent worth. Their inability to love authentically, to connect genuinely, to see beyond their own needs. These are tragic limitations that create suffering for everyone involved. Your journey toward psychological freedom doesn't depend on their recognition or acknowledgement. In fact, one of the signs of true individualization is that you no longer need their validation to feel whole. Your sense of self becomes internal, stable, and independent of their opinion or presence. This is what Jung meant by psychological sovereignty, the ability to be fully yourself regardless of others' reactions, manipulations, or attempts at control. It's the difference between reactive living and conscious living, between emotional dependency and authentic love. The development of psychological sovereignty is perhaps the most important outcome of surviving a narcissistic relationship. It represents a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself and others. Instead of seeking external validation, you develop internal validation. Instead of avoiding conflict at all costs, you learn to maintain boundaries with grace. Instead of sacrificing yourself for others' comfort, you learn to honor your own needs and feelings. This transformation often includes what I call the reclamation process, where empaths gradually take back all the parts of themselves they gave away during the relationship. They reclaim their opinions, their preferences, their dreams, their energy, and their emotional responses. They learn to trust their own perceptions again after years of gaslighting and manipulation. Jung wrote extensively about the process of reclaiming projected aspects of the self. In narcissistic relationships, empaths often project their own strength, wisdom, and capability onto the narcissist, while taking on the narcissist's projected weakness, neediness, and emotional instability. Recovery involves withdrawing these projections and owning your authentic qualities. This reclamation process can be disorienting at first. After years of defining yourself in relation to someone else's needs, discovering your own authentic desires and boundaries can feel strange. But it's also incredibly liberating. You begin to remember who you were before the relationship, and you discover who you're becoming through the healing process. Now, let me give you a practical framework for understanding where you are in this process, because recognizing your own stage of development is crucial for continued growth and healing. The empath's journey toward freedom, 4 stages. Stage 1, the awakening. This is when you first begin to recognize the unhealthy dynamics in your relationship. You might start questioning why you feel constantly drained, why nothing you do seems good enough, why you're always walking on eggshells. Jung called this the first glimpse of consciousness, the moment when we begin to see our patterns clearly. During this stage, you might notice that you've lost touch with your own needs and desires. You realize you've been so focused on managing the narcissist's emotions that you've forgotten how to attend to your own. You might start feeling resentful or exhausted without fully understanding why. The awakening stage often includes moments of clarity that come and go. You might have a realization about the unhealthy dynamics, then find yourself doubting your perceptions a few days later. This back and forth is normal and reflects the powerful conditioning that keeps people trapped in narcissistic relationships. Jung wrote about the difficulty of maintaining consciousness once we've glimpsed our patterns. The unconscious mind resists change and will often pull us back into familiar dynamics, even when those dynamics are harmful. Recognizing this resistance is part of the awakening process. Stage 2. The struggle. During this phase, you know something's wrong, but you keep trying to fix the relationship through your own efforts. You might read self-help books, try communication strategies, or attempt to love the narcissist into health. This stage can last years, and it's characterized by internal conflict between your growing awareness and your conditioned responses. The struggle stage is often the most painful part of the journey because you're caught between two worlds: the world where you know something is deeply wrong and the world where you keep hoping things will improve if you just try harder. This creates enormous internal tension and self-doubt. Jung described this as the tension between the conscious and unconscious mind. Your conscious mind is beginning to recognize the unhealthy patterns, but your unconscious mind is still operating from old conditioning about relationships, worth, and responsibility for others' emotions. During this stage, you might find yourself making small attempts at boundaries, only to quickly abandon them when the narcissist reacts negatively. You might start to prioritize your own needs, then feel guilty and revert to people-pleasing. This internal conflict is exhausting but necessary for eventual breakthrough. It's important to understand that the struggle stage serves a purpose. You're not failing if you find yourself going back and forth between healthy choices and old patterns. You're actually building the psychological muscles necessary for eventual freedom. Each small attempt at boundaries, even if you don't maintain them, is practice for the bigger breakthrough that's coming. Stage 3. The decision. This is the crucial turning point where you choose your own psychological well-being over the relationship. It might happen suddenly or gradually, but there's a clear moment when you decide that preserving your authentic self is more important than maintaining the connection. Jung described this as choosing life over death, not physical death, but the psychological death that comes from complete self-abandonment. The decision stage often comes after a particular incident that crystallizes everything you've been learning about the relationship. It might be a moment of cruelty that you simply can't rationalize away, or it might be a quiet moment when you realize you no longer recognize yourself in the relationship. This stage requires enormous courage because you're choosing uncertainty over familiar dysfunction. You're choosing to face the unknown rather than continue tolerating the known pain. Jung wrote about the necessity of courage in psychological development, the willingness to step into the unknown in service of growth. The decision stage often involves grieving the relationship you thought you had or hoped you could have. You're not just leaving a person. You're abandoning the fantasy of who they could become and the dream of the love you thought you could create together. But there's also profound relief in this stage. When you finally choose yourself, when you finally prioritize your own well-being, there's a sense of coming home to yourself that many empaths haven't felt in years. You remember what it feels like to be on your own side. Stage 4. The integration. In this final stage, you've not only left the narcissistic relationship, but have also done the internal work to ensure you don't repeat these patterns. You've integrated the lessons, healed the wounds, and developed the self-awareness to recognize and avoid similar dynamics in the future. Integration involves understanding not just what happened to you, but why you were vulnerable to that type of relationship in the first place. This isn't about self-blame. It's about developing the self-knowledge that protects you going forward. Jung emphasized that integration requires facing our own shadow, the parts of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge. For empaths, this often means confronting their own people-pleasing tendencies, their fear of abandonment, their need to be needed, and their tendency to lose themselves in others' emotions. The integration stage also involves developing what Jung called conscious relationships, connections based on genuine mutual respect rather than unconscious psychological needs. You learn to love others without losing yourself, to care without becoming codependent, to empathize without taking responsibility for others' emotional states. This stage is characterized by a deep sense of psychological freedom. You no longer feel compelled to fix others or prove your worth through service. You can offer genuine care and support without depleting yourself or losing your boundaries. The beautiful truth is that reaching stage 4 makes you essentially narcissist-proof. You've developed such a strong sense of self, such clear boundaries, and such deep self-respect that manipulative individuals can no longer find purchase in your life. This is when the narcissist's loss of you becomes complete and irreversible. They can't manipulate what they can't access, and they can't control someone who has claimed their own psychological sovereignty. I want you to think about this. The narcissist's moment of terrible realization that they've lost you forever is actually your moment of triumph. It represents your successful journey towards psychological wholeness and authentic selfhood. Jung believed that individualization is the highest goal of human psychological development. When you break free from narcissistic control, you're not just leaving a bad relationship, you're claiming your birthright as a conscious, autonomous human being. The narcissist's loss is profound because they're losing someone who has become psychologically unreachable. You've moved beyond their sphere of influence into a realm of self-determination they've never experienced themselves. This transformation creates a fascinating psychological dynamic. The more genuinely whole you become, the less attractive you are to narcissistic individuals. Healthy people are drawn to your authenticity, while manipulative people find nothing to exploit. It's like you've changed frequencies entirely. The narcissist is still broadcasting on the same wavelength of control, manipulation, and emotional dependency, but you're no longer tuned into that station. You've found a completely different frequency, one of self-respect, genuine connection, and psychological freedom. Understanding this dynamic can help you maintain your boundaries and continue growing, even when the narcissist tries to pull you back into the old patterns. Remember, their attempts to reconnect aren't about love or genuine reconciliation. They're about recapturing a source of psychological supply they've lost. Let me share something profound that Jung wrote about the nature of psychological transformation. He believed that when we truly individuate, when we become psychologically whole, we not only heal ourselves, but also contribute to the healing of the collective unconscious. Your journey toward freedom doesn't just benefit you. It creates ripples that touch everyone in your life. When you break free from narcissistic control and claim your authentic self, you become a beacon for others who are struggling in similar dynamics. Your transformation demonstrates that freedom is possible, that healing is real, and that people can change their relationship patterns. This doesn't mean you need to become a therapist or healing professional, though some empaths who go through this journey do feel called to help others. It simply means that your presence in the world as a psychologically sovereign person contributes to the overall health of human relationships. Jung wrote about what he called the healing power of example, the way that one person's authentic transformation can inspire and enable others to find their own path to wholeness. Your journey from codependency to psychological freedom serves this function, whether you're aware of it or not. The narcissist's realization that they've lost you forever is also a moment of recognition that they've lost access to the healing potential you represented. Not because it was your job to heal them, but because your presence in their life was their closest contact with authentic love and genuine emotional availability. Their loss of you represents the loss of their last connection to psychological health. This is why the realization is so devastating. It's not just about losing a relationship, but about losing their final link to the possibility of genuine transformation. But here's what's crucial to understand. This loss is the natural consequence of their choices, not your abandonment of them. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you started caring about yourself. You didn't abandon them. You rescued yourself. The distinction is vital because many empaths carry guilt about the pain their departure causes. But Jung was clear that we cannot sacrifice our own psychological development for another person's comfort, even when that person is suffering. In fact, he argued that enabling others to avoid the natural consequences of their choices is ultimately cruel because it prevents them from encountering the crisis that might motivate genuine change. Your departure might be the most loving thing you could do for the narcissist, even though it doesn't feel that way to either of you at the time. Your journey toward wholeness continues beyond this relationship, but breaking free from narcissistic control is often the catalyst that launches deeper personal growth and more authentic connections with others. Jung wrote that we must become conscious of our unconscious patterns in order to change them. By understanding the psychology behind narcissistic relationships and your own empath journey, you're taking control of your psychological destiny in a way that creates lasting transformation. The narcissist's realization that they've lost you forever marks the beginning of your new life, a life where your emotional energy belongs to you, where your love is given freely rather than extracted through manipulation, and where your sense of worth comes from within rather than from others' validation. This is the true victory. Not that you've hurt them by leaving, but that you've saved yourself by choosing growth over stagnation, authenticity over people-pleasing, and psychological freedom over emotional imprisonment. The moment they realize they've lost you forever is the same moment you realize you've found yourself completely. And that, more than anything else, makes this journey worth every difficult step you've taken to get here. Your transformation into a psychologically sovereign individual is the greatest gift you can give yourself and the most powerful statement you can make about what you deserve in relationships. The narcissist's loss of you isn't a tragedy. It's the natural consequence of your growth into the person you were always meant to become. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human psychological development is what he called self-realization, the integration of all aspects of the personality into a cohesive, authentic whole. Breaking free from narcissistic control is often a crucial step in this journey because it forces you to confront your own patterns, reclaim your projected aspects, and develop genuine self-relationship. The narcissist's terrible realization that they've lost you forever is actually a testament to your successful psychological evolution. You've become someone who can no longer be manipulated, controlled, or diminished by others' unconscious needs. You've claimed your place as the author of your own life story. This transformation ripples through every aspect of your existence. Your relationships become more authentic because you're no longer attracted to dysfunction or willing to tolerate disrespect. Your career choices align more closely with your genuine interests and values because you're no longer making decisions based on others' expectations. Your emotional life becomes more stable because you're no longer dependent on external validation for your sense of worth. The narcissist's loss represents the death of an old version of you, the version that believed love required self-sacrifice, that care meant taking responsibility for others' emotions, that worth was earned through service to others' needs. In losing you, they've lost access to someone who will carry their psychological burdens, manage their emotions, and enable their avoidance of genuine self-development. But you, the authentic you, have finally been born. You've emerged from the cocoon of codependency as someone who can love without losing yourself, care without becoming depleted, and empathize without taking responsibility for others' healing journey. This is why their realization of loss is so complete and irreversible. You haven't just changed your mind about the relationship, you've fundamentally transformed as a person. You've evolved beyond their capacity to reach or influence, and that evolution continues every day as you practice living as your authentic self. The narcissist's moment of terrible realization is your moment of complete liberation. They've lost you forever and you've found yourself completely. That exchange, their loss for your freedom, is the most valuable transaction you'll ever make.